Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you tuned in to join us today, whether you're in the United States, Europe, Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia. Welcome back to Konbit Talk. I'm Reverend Milan Derosier. It has been a few months, but we are back and very, very excited to introduce a new segment occurring on the weekends on Combi Talk. People who follows us on, our different platform, Facebook and other platform, Spotify and so forth, I have heard on Combi Talk, but if you haven't, EHCC's Combi Talk is really your go-to podcast for the heartbeat of the community. Dive into the rich tapestry of stories and conversations that shape our lives, from the crucial social determinants of health to pressing issues like housing, immigration, cultural preservation, youth leadership, you name it, and even safe healing. This new segment will be tackling the issues of problem gambling in youth today. And so it is really an honor for me to welcome many members of our youth team. Some are not here today, some are here to support, some are here and doing technical activities, but some of them you will see and hear today. And so it is going to be really a conversation that you don't want to miss. Call your friends and parents, call other members of your family to tune in. Problem gambling is essentially when someone's gambling habits start to negatively affect their lives. This can happen when they spend too much time or money on gambling, feel anxious or stressed when they cannot gamble or continue to gamble, even though it's causing problems with friends, family, school, or work. It's not just about losing money, but also about how gambling affects a person's well being, relationships, and even the pockets, right? And so EHCC started its work on problem gambling prevention with our Project Rise 3 years, for about 3 years. And we took a pause for about half a year. And we launched YouLead, an impactful youth leadership project where youth who are very engaged in the community are engaging in curbing problem gambling within their peers. And it is an honor for me to let them introduce themselves to you and introduce our guests. And today, it's not I, but they will own the show. And I will start. Welcome, all of you. And Valet, Valeria, you have the show.
I am Valeria. I'm a youth leader here at the EHCC and I'm part of the program, which Megan was talking about. And today we have a very special guest speaker, Nakita. She's from the Cambridge Health Alliance, and she's here to just talk about her role, her work, bringing to the community. So we're here, and we're thrilled to welcome her.
Well, let's welcome Nakita.
Thanks, y'all. Very happy to be here. Very excited to be here. Yes, my name is Nakita Sconsoni. I work for the Division on Addiction at Cambridge Health Alliance. It's a hospital in this general area. I have my master's in social work from the University of New Hampshire, and I'm really passionate, about helping people in the community, helping people in general. That's really why I got into this field, and it really just drawed me in. So I'm really excited to chat with y'all today.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'll be asking the first question I have. What is your work at the CHA, and how do you like to address the problem?
Yes. So like I said, I work on the Division on Addiction. So what this division does is in this role, I am a community health educator. So basically what I do is educate the community on health-related issues, particularly addiction. And within addiction, we emphasize education about gambling. So I do a variety of things at the division. One of my primary roles is to educate healthcare providers on gambling addiction. So what we'll do is develop trainings, and this entails reading a lot of research to educate myself and others on recent research that has been put out about gambling and various addictions. And we create these trainings and facilitate these trainings for healthcare providers in the area. This could be social workers, doctors, even recovery coaches, even people in the community have attended our trainings. And so we do trainings on treatment for gambling disorder, co-occurring disorders with gambling, promoting your problem gambling services, screening for problem gambling, assessing problem gambling. So that really is my primary role. So we create these trainings, and they're online, they're virtual, but they're live trainings. We also have developed online training. So what I do for these is, again, read copious amounts of research on the field of addiction and kind of make it palatable for a learner. We create online courses, we create slides, animations, even have people with lived experience contribute to our online courses. And we just really want to educate the community in the most accessible, easy way that we can about addiction. Because in order for people to really be interested and learn, you have to make your content engaging and accessible. So that's really my primary role, is making this education accessible for the public. Another way that I do that is through what we call the BASIS, the Brief Addiction Science Information Source. And this is kind of like a blog that the division started. We read current addiction science, so those lengthy research papers, some of you might be familiar with. They have some long words in there. They have some criteria, some information that's a little difficult to understand. So part of my job is to read that research and make it palatable for the public. We reduce that research into like one-page summaries. And this research covers all different types of addiction: smoking, substance use, alcohol use, and gambling. So yeah, really what my primary role is to bring addiction research and understanding to the public so that we can all work together to kind of help those people living with addiction towards their version of recovery.
Hello, my name is Rentmila, and I am a youth ambassador for the Youth program at EHCC. What do you find rewarding about it?
Great question. My work I find to be very rewarding. Social work can be a very difficult field. You work with a lot of different populations, sometimes with people kind of at the worst parts of their life. So I find reward in being that support for those people. Part of my role is to listen to them and listen to their stories. And I think that in order for all of us to be educated around addiction and to actually help the people affected by addiction, you have to listen to them. They are the most important people in their own story. They know their lives better than anybody else. So I find that it's very, very important to hear from their perspective. And I like engaging with people and hearing from them about their life's journey. And I like helping them be able to advocate for themselves and help themselves reach their level of recovery, whatever that may look like to them. Recovery is very different depending on the person. So I find it really rewarding to be able to help people advocate for their needs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Janael. I'm a part of the Youth EHCC. And my first question is, how did you build your self-confidence in your work as a leader?
Great. Yeah. So being a leader didn't always come naturally to me. I definitely had to work at it. I'm definitely more of a shy personality, more of an introvert. But through this role specifically, I had to really jump out of my comfort zone. I facilitate a lot of trainings, which entails a lot of public speaking, which is something that I'm not always super confident in. But I think that to be a good leader, you have to put yourself out of your comfort zone. You have to reframe this anxiety that sometimes doing new things will give you a little anxiety. I like to reframe that and say, well, this anxiety is good. This means that I'm doing something important. This means that I'm doing something worthwhile. It means I'm doing something exciting, something that's going to maybe change me as a person. You have to reach a point where something makes you a little bit uncomfortable and then you overstep that, and that's how you grow as a person, and that's how you can become a better leader for others, because you were willing to get yourself out of your comfort zone, and so you can empower other people to do the same. And I think great leaders are able to do that for others.
I'm Felipe. I'm one of the new lead ambassadors here at EHCC. And my question is, as you develop as a leader, what was one thing you'll never forget or a skill you'll use forever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of skills that I've acquired over my, I don't know. How long have I been in social work? Graduated in 2020 with my master's, so minimum 5 years. Yeah, the thing that I've kind of learned throughout my career, because like I said, I'm quite introverted. So reaching out to people was not something that I was always so comfortable doing. But I've learned that your community and the people you work with and the people who support you are your biggest, advocates. They can be like a support system for you. So networking is huge. In a lot of this field, it's not necessarily who you know, but it's how can I use the people that I have met to connect the people that I'm helping with resources. So it's really nice to kind of create this like social network of professionals in your life. So like, for example, I worked with a client in my previous years of schooling. I was a mental health counselor for a mental health center in New Hampshire. So I had a client who was struggling with some family issues, and through one of my other jobs, I was connected with somebody who dealt with that specific family issue that my client was facing. And because I, again, got out of my comfort zone and was able to network with different people in the field, I was able to help my client and connect them with a resource that they needed. And I might not have been able to do that if I wasn't broadening my social network and really connecting with people. So yeah, I would say networking is probably the thing that I have learned the most, that has really helped me throughout my career, for sure. And asking for help as well. Yeah, I find that sometimes I try to figure everything out myself. But then I learned, like, why am I doing that? Like, everyone has strengths. And so I should be tapping into other people's strengths. And similarly, people can tap into my strengths, so that we're all kind of collectively working to accomplish a goal together. Why am I trying to accomplish this goal myself? I had to change that mindset for myself. So yeah, those are some two things that I've learned throughout my career that have been really helpful.
I am Ralph Asher Alphonse, and I'm one of the youth leaders at EHCC. How can a youth leader best use social media to promote or teach other youth to stop problem gambling?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because social media is so prominent in many of our lives. That's one way how we're broadcasting all of this is via social media. So it's important that you're reaching the target audience that you want, and you're not going to target that audience if your content does not appeal to them, right? So my recommendation would be to get the buy-in from youth. Ask them, what does your social media look like? What videos are you watching? What posts are you interacting with? because they're gonna know best, right? I'm not old, but I'm not I wouldn't consider myself a youth. But I would ask y'all, like, what kind of content are you clicking on? What's appealing to you? If a post has too much text, are you reading it? What is the most engaging aspect of a post to you? I would have might have a different opinion than you would on that. So I think in order to promote things to youth, you have to ask youth. I think getting people's lived experience is such a crucial part of this work. And also maybe sharing that lived experience. So not only just hearing, like doing a focus group or something for youth about what kind of social media posts they like or interact with, but also maybe interviewing them, having that be a social media post. When youth hear from youth, sometimes that is more empowering, sometimes because you can relate a little more. So I would say engage with youth in the entire process, because y'all would know best, better than I would. And that kind of leads me to one form of promotion that we've done in collaboration, the Division on Addiction, in collaboration with EHCC. We actually made these booklets. These are problem gambling prevention booklets. And one way that we developed these booklets was we created focus groups with patrons of EHCC. So people who came to this community center, we sat them down, we said, what's most important to you about problem gambling? What are the gaps? What resources would be most helpful to you? So we polled them, we asked them, what type of resource do you need? And then we developed that resource and we translated it into Haitian Creole. We have English copies available via PDF, but we have printed copies and PDF copies in Haitian Creole. And I think the benefit of this resource is that
Most
it's
of them
so
are gone by now. We just have a few left.
excellent. So that stellar, perfect. But I think that's the benefit of this type of resource, is because the community actually created this. It wasn't someone from the outside kind of looking and being like, maybe they would find this helpful, maybe this would be good for them. They actually developed it. So I think, yeah, similarly to social media posts, ask the youth, what's going to be the most engaging for you?
Okay. So how do we market or use marketing materials in a way where we attract the youth to be interested in helping problem gambling, prevention, or any problem?
Yeah. So kind of similarly to my previous answer, to market to the youth, get the youth's engagement. I think, like I said, having lived experience can be very, what's the word I'm looking for? It can be very impactful. We have
That's their word.
impact, yes. We have an online course called Community Voices in Recovery. This was a course that we created in conjunction with Health Resources in Action. It's a Boston-based organization and funded by the Office of Problem Gambling Services. And this course, we did something a little different here. So we interviewed people with lived experience who are in recovery. They have lived experience with addiction, various types of addiction. And these people they had varying different identities. So they were they were minoritized by various different identities. So either minoritized for their race or ethnicity, minoritized for their LGBTQ plus status, minoritized for incarceration experience, minoritized for their housing experience, and I think that's it. LGBTQ, minoritized, housing, incarceration. Yes, I believe those were all the categories. So not only was this person facing addiction, but they were facing other types of difficulties within their lives. And we interviewed them and we asked them, what is your life like? How has your recovery process been? What would you like healthcare providers to know about your experience so that they can best help you? what has your experience been with healthcare providers, both positive and negative? So we were really trying to get their input so that the healthcare providers that were taking this course, that were watching these interviews, could put a face to the addiction. I think sometimes when you hear about addiction, it's easy to be like, okay, yes, people experience this. Yes, that's tough. It's much more than that. This is someone's life. So when you actually see the person sitting in that chair being like, yes, when I went to my healthcare provider appointment, they didn't respect me at all. They didn't address me by my appropriate pronouns. They didn't address me the way that I wanted to be addressed. I felt really stigmatized. I felt really uncomfortable, things like that. They were sharing those experiences. And I think it's really helpful, like what this question is asking, for social media promotion to share that lived experience. Maybe some youth in the community have experience with gambling and they've struggled with it. Find that person, hear from them. You know, what has really impacted you in your life, and how have you overcome this, or what resources were helpful, resources weren't helpful. So I think that, like I said, putting a face to the addiction or to the struggle can help people believe it, to help people see it, because I feel like sometimes there's just this stigma that's, yes, people have addiction, some people care about it, some people don't, but when you put a face to that person, I think it makes it more real, and it makes people, dare I say, care more. I think I care about a lot of people, you know, but I'm in social work, you know, not everyone feels that way. So yeah, putting a face to the person, to their struggles, to how they live their life, can get buy-in from others to kind of want to make a change and to support people. Yes.
What are the best ways used to outreach or market prevention materials or good ideas you have?
Best ways to outreach. Yeah. So like I said, get the buy-in from youth. If we're going to reach them, we have to know the spaces that they go, the platforms that they use, because there's so many social media platforms, but which ones are youth actually using? That's, of course, where we would want to market the materials. Where are youth going? Where do they hang out? Churches, youth groups, community centers, the park. I don't know where you've gone. So I don't know where y'all go, where y'all hang out. Yeah. Yeah. So go to those places, do outreach there, like connect with them. And also youth can smell people being fake, you know. Don't be fake with them. Like, meet them where they're at. Tell them like the reality of the situation. Don't sugarcoat, oh, problem gambling is XYZ. Like, give them the reality of it. What are the odds of winning? You know, what, like, don't sugarcoat this information for them. They want to know. They want to be educated. So meet them where they're at and actually educate them. Don't try to hide that, like, addiction isn't real. Like, no, like, let's face it. Like, let's tell them the reality of the situation. Yeah, be real with them. And I think they'd appreciate it. Someone coming, hitting it straight, like getting it straight. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'd say.
Right.
So the next question,
How can we empower them to take action? Yeah.
Not to be afraid.
Yeah.
Empowered.
Yes. Have to be, empowered to do it. I think letting them know that gambling addiction is real. We spoke a little earlier and we talked about how gambling can be a hidden addiction. You can't always smell it on someone's breath. You can't always see it on their face. Some people's families won't know that their partner or whomever has a gambling addiction until it's too late, until all the money's gone from their financial accounts, you know. Remind them that gambling is real and this is something that people can struggle with. And again, like I said, I can't stress it enough, lived experience. Let people know that this person is experiencing an issue with gambling. This person's real. This person's life matters. Really drive that home. I think whenever you can kind of put a face to the name, it kind of pulls on people's heartstrings more, because it's easy to look at a statistic and say, okay, 60 to 80, this is a prevalent statistic actually, 60 to 80% of youth have youth being defined loosely by the age of 15 to 24 have gambled within the past year, and 35% have gambled within the past week. So it's easy to look at that number and be like, okay, sure, numbers, right? It's way different to look at someone across from you and say, oh, you are struggling with gambling. You are not just a number. So I think getting people to view gambling and gambling treatment, gambling education, gambling prevention in that way will empower them and want them to actually make a difference and actually help this person.
I have one more question. How have you and what advice would you give such as ourselves in handling any feedback or criticism on how we develop outreach and marketing to curb problem?
Yeah, I welcome criticism. I'm not perfect. I love a critique.
Sometimes it's hard to hear, right?
Sure. Oh yes. Am I welcoming it every time? No, sometimes I get it. Sometimes it stings a little. Yeah. Like sometimes it's like, oof, like I don't want that. But I welcome it because it helps you grow. So if someone's critiquing something about you, like your homework, your papers, whatever, outreach, if there's a better way to do something, let me know. That's fine. We share a common goal. I'm just trying to reach the most people that I can in the most impactful way that I can. And if you have a better way of doing that, let a girl know. You know, I won't know until someone tells me, right? So the other day we had a gambling disorder screening day event here. And I, alongside EHCC, we helped screen people for gambling disorder. And after screening people for gambling disorder or throughout the entire event, we have a lot of informational brochures, a lot of resources. We had both of these resources out there and other various resources, right? So I packed up all these resources, got there, felt really confident about all the stuff that I had, really excited. And then someone brought to my attention a resource that I was missing, that resource that could actually have benefited people that I didn't consider. They wanted to know more about responsible gambling, safer gambling. How can someone who isn't ready to fully commit to stopping gambling, but just wants to know how to gamble in a safer, more responsible way, how can they do that? And I was looking around at my resources and I was like, oh, dang, I don't have that resource. So I welcome that type of critique because that will now improve our collective outreach efforts. Now, when I went back and I told my supervisor, I was like, hey, we're missing this. And she was like, let's go. Like, let's create this resource for them. And I wouldn't know that unless I'm doing this outreach and someone let me know. So I welcome it. I take it. I love it. Critique me.
Does the tone matter?
Oh, the tone is key. Yes. Don't come at me aggressive, but like approach me responsibly. Approach me with compassion. Love it.
I would like to say something else. Now it's free flow.
Oh, free flow combo.
Okay.
Ooh,
Like
awesome.
Get on this. It's a conversation.
Yes.
Is problem gambling able to affect your personality in some sort of way?
Yes, that's a very, very interesting question. So when people are living with an addiction, sometimes they kind of transform into not someone that they used to be. They become kind of sometimes a different person. It depends on the person. It depends on their severity of their addiction. But sometimes, yes, you can become a different person because, so for example, for gambling, a lot of times the harms associated with gambling, a big one is financial harm, right? So when someone before gambling might not have worried about their finances, but then once gambling and losing a lot of money to gambling, they might become stressed, right? So they might be like hypersensitive, hyper anxious, irritable, much more irritable than they were before gambling, before this problem started. So definitely aspects of their personality can change because of the heightened anxiety or because of feelings of depression or other mental health concerns that they might be experiencing as a result of their gambling can change who they are as a person and how they act. Yeah, that's a really great question.
I had a question. Can gambling physically affect you?
Physically, yes. So I've read studies about people who have gambled for days. They have not left the casino. They have been at the slot machine seat for days,
Back to back.
back to back.
Wow.
And the casino is it's a little tricky in there. There's no windows. It's always cold, so it keeps you alert, and you don't know what time. There's no clocks. You don't know what time of day it is. So sometimes people get lost, and so people have lost sleep. The anxiety aspect of it, insomnia, can be a big factor when people aren't sleeping and they have a lot of anxiety. So that can affect them physically. There's also studies on internal bodily functions that get interrupted due to gambling. So some people have really bad stomach issues as a result of their gambling. This can be caused by lack of sleep, lack of eating, because they're so focused on getting that next win that they forget about their own physical health. Yeah.
Wow. I had another question. How does gambling, how does an addiction start?
Mhm.
What goes through someone's brain to make them addicted to gambling?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that gambling initiation can start. Some people are exposed to gambling at a young age, so it's just normalized in their homes. A lot of cultures use gambling as a part of their community building activities. A lot of families will give scratch tickets for birthday gifts or holiday presents. So if gambling is normalized in your upbringing, you might view gambling as not something that you can be addicted to, but more of a game. And that's completely normal to you. And so you grow up and you experience gambling and you got hooked. You really loved the chase. You really loved the way you felt when you won, because it was so normal before that no one discussed the potential negative sides of gambling. So yeah, it was normalized to you. And so when you grew up, not you specifically, I'm talking you in the general you start gambling and didn't know the consequences of it. And then you get lost in it. Some other people have people whose parents have gambling disorder. They might be more inclined to gamble if their parent also has a gambling disorder, not just if they grew up with gambling in their family. Even if they didn't grow up and gambling wasn't normalized, if a parent does have a gambling disorder, the child could also grow up to have a gambling disorder. So yeah, that's a very common way is to be exposed to it as a child. Also the marketing tactics that some of these gambling industries have kind of put forth, especially with the legalization of sports betting. A lot of those marketing tactics are to show gambling in a really nice light. Gambling's fun. You can win some money. You can play with your friends, have a drink while you're gambling. It's a party atmosphere. It's a fun atmosphere. The celebrities are in the promotions. If the celebrity's doing, my favorite basketball player, whomever is doing it, Kevin Hart's telling me that he gambles, he's a funny guy. I might as well try this out too. So it's yeah, you trust them. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Right. These celebrities that are promoting this, you look up to them, some people, and if they're doing it, why can't I do it? And that's kind of the framework. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that gambling, that people can initiate gambling. Those are just a couple of them.
It's pretty clear that it's very accessible, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So guys, is it accessible? Do you feel like it's accessible in your community within reach? Talk to us about more of that. How do you think it's that accessible?
People even in school, people kids just make a bet on the game, and stuff like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Just amongst friends,
Yeah.
I feel like it starts it starts with a little bit of money. You're like, oh, that's $5, $10, and so people they just get used to that. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I understand maybe $5 or $10 isn't a big deal, but then you get addicted to that feeling of always wanting more, which is just a feeling we get as humans. Sometimes we just always want And so I think that's what encourages people to just keep going and don't take the risk. But then obviously, they think they're gonna always reality. So
You're going to say something?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
So what do you think? My question is, do providers have a treatment for gambling? And also, I know that education is
Mm.
part of it, but it doesn't mean that the person will stop doing
Right.
it. And I like to question.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead, go for it.
No, I love
And
it.
also, do you think that healthcare providers take seriously this person?
Mhm. Okay. Yes. So there are treatment options for gambling disorder. Again, it depends on the person and their severity with gambling. So oftentimes people can recover from gambling disorder with self-help resources. It's not on the table right now, but there's a really great guide that some staff at the Division on Addiction where I work, they developed Your First Step to Change. And that is a self-help resource that you can freely order from the Massachusetts Clearinghouse if you so wish, if you want to access that. But yes, so this is a self-help resource. It just gets people thinking about their gambling, whether or not they want to change, aspects of their gambling that benefit them, aspects that don't. So most people who have gambling disorder can recover through these self-help resources. Other self-help resources could be considered like podcasts. So there's a lot of gambling. Yeah, right. There's a lot of gambling related podcasts out there. We collaborated with the host of the After Gambling podcast. We collaborated with them to create an online course where they talked about their experiences with gambling. And then we added supplemental information about what the research says about gambling. So it was kind of that twofold. Again, like I said, lived experience is so huge. And that's why we incorporate this into a lot of our courses. So some people could listen to their podcast and feel heard, feel like they have a community. Similarly, Gamblers Anonymous, Bettors Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, there's a lot of these self-help, community building type of meetings and types of organizations that let people who have a gambling disorder or who are thinking of their gambling and haven't yet committed to wanting to change, just kind of being a part of that community can provide some sort of comfort, and that can help them recover. If you have more intensive gambling, what you could do, again, recovery is your own option. You decide how you want to recover. You decide what treatment options you want. But the treatment options for gambling disorder could include cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing is a type of therapeutic strategy that helps the client think about their gambling a little differently. Why are they ambivalent towards changing their gambling? What step in the change process are they on in addressing their gambling? I think it's 5 steps of changing of 5 steps of change. Is it 4 or 5? I'm not a clinician. but yeah, so it's kind of just, it's a way of discussing with a healthcare provider why they feel like they want to change their gambling or why they don't. It's kind of nice to have that bounce board of someone responding to you and responding to your anxieties that can help people kind of reframe the way they think about their gambling. And that's another, cognitive behavioral therapy is another way to do that. A big aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy is to get people to think about why they're making these gambling decisions. There are things called cognitive distortions that make people believe that their odds of winning are greater than they actually are. It's these distorted patterns of thinking. So someone could have a cognitive distortion called illusion of control. They truly feel like they have control over whether their bets win or lose. So cognitive behavioral therapy will help them reframe that thought. The therapist or healthcare provider, social worker, whomever, will talk with them and say, okay, so you think that by going to the casino wearing your green shirt, this means that you win. This is your lucky shirt. this shirt helps you win. Why do you think that? What do you say to yourself when you walk into this casino wearing your green shirt? What do you actually say to yourself that makes you think that this will help you win? It's really getting to the root of their cognition and reframing those illusions of control. So that's for more intensive gambling disorder. To your second question, yes, I definitely think that healthcare providers do want to help people with gambling disorder. I think sometimes there's just a lack of understanding of gambling disorder, and that's what we're trying to address here. But I do think that they absolutely mean well and they want to do right by their clients. They might just not know the full scope of what gambling is, how it's impacting them, and how they can be of use and help them support their recovery.
And so it's pretty clear that then it does really, as you've mentioned,
Yeah.
and the youth have also talked about, so clearly impact physically, mentally, emotionally,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
financially, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
financially. So and for you as well, the youth young leaders, some for those who are enticed to be engaged in it, we've heard people say, even some young adults, that they think you're going to make lots of money, then it's an investment. And some other youth we've heard, especially when we did a focus group, that it's for fun. So what do you think could be alternative entertainment, alternative activities that can be provided or make accessible to the young people as a deterrence to problem gambling? I mean, to gambling.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? What some of the activities you think that you would people would love to do, youth would love to do, that can be used, that can be as enticing? What do you think?
For youth that we believe are or maybe not, but they should still consider this is expose them to like other alternatives. So that could be like going on field trips. A lot of like the work that we do here at the EHCC, which is we bring youth to do other activities, to maybe like community service, help the community, just so that they can realize that there's so much more out there than just gambling. Because sometimes people just don't know their alternatives and they just go to what's easy. So I believe, yeah, just like older age, experience is a great way.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I feel like playing sports.
Physical activity, yes.
Yeah, like playing with your friends, like going outside to the park. Like that could like take like your mind away from gambling. It could like take away the focus on that.
Yeah. And if we don't have access to those, create them, right?
Yeah.
So we have a responsibility as providers, as municipalities and government and state and families to to create that.
Yep.
And so that would be great to do that. That's one aspect of it. Wow, time has flown.
Oh my gosh.
What a great conversation this has been.
I have one last question.
One last, okay, because a young adult technician just told us that we're running out of time. So the last one.
Do you think that gambling addiction is as dangerous as like a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction?
That's a huge one. Wow.
Oh, I love it.
You're saving this for last.
Yes. Ending on a big
high
note.
note.
Yes, I absolutely think it is. Gambling can affect a person's life just as much as substance use can. With gambling addiction, people can become withdrawn from their families. There's that financial aspect to gambling that causes stress and anxiety. Gambling can cause anxiety and depression. And like the question that you brought up about changing someone's personality, they can become entirely different people. They're chasing that win. They're doing things that they normally wouldn't do because of their gambling, because of this addiction that they need to feed. You might think because somebody who uses substances might physically look a little different than someone who's gambling because, like we said, it's hidden. But the person with a gambling addiction can be just as impacted than they can be just as impacted as somebody with a substance use addiction. Absolutely. It affects similar parts of the brain. It can affect, financially, emotionally, physically, your relationships. It affects all of the same types of areas that substance use can. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
on that note, we say thank you to
Thank you.
Nakita
Oh
for
my
joining
gosh.
us. That was great.
Thank you all
Let's
of
also
you.
give an applause to our wonderful young ambassadors, new leaders. And behind the scene, we need to thank also our youth, young adults who are not at the table today, but who are doing the hard work behind the scene to make sure this podcast, is accessible and available today. And so let's give a huge thank you to Stefan. An amazing thank you to Dee. A wonderful thank you to Christopher. And last but not least, a good thank you to Dave. Thank you for the also young adults and youth who joined us. I think everyone who joined us today, and for all of those who are listening. Thank you very much for tuning in, you the audience, into this episode of Konbit Talk, and a huge thank you to Department of Public Health, BCNC, and let's not forget the parents of all our youth and young adult leaders who give them the permission to participate and be part of this journey so that they can be impactful leaders in problem gambling prevention. Until next time. Until next time. Until next time, which is next week, join us for another episode of Konbit Talk, presented by You Lead Project. Until then, stay blessed.